We're not technically or well, now we are technically live. I don't know what I did. I did something here, but I screwed up
Okay.
the screen, but I got you on, so we're just waiting for people to get back in here. How are you?
I'm good, man. Just, trying to keep our property alive. So, I'm watering the grass and cutting, trimming so that when you get back in the air chair, the facility will be pristine.
I got to work my way to getting a home studio, so I don't have to go into 90.
No, I'm at 980.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Oh, look at you. Wait, I was looking at the background. I didn't see it. I'm in there tomorrow. Wait, what
Yeah, yeah.
are you doing a Russell show?
Yeah. No,
Oh,
no, he's on now. They're on now. I'm just waiting it out. I always when I know he's not in, he's at home, so I can come in here and get organized and be don't have to rush because he's always late leaving. So we gotta fly in here. So no, this is comfortable way to lead into it.
well, I appreciate that. I'll be in there tomorrow, so
Yeah,
don't set the bar too high. The training camp it'll be more like what we just had with OTAs and mini camp.
yeah,
A bit of a refresher. Just seeing kind of where guys are at, getting guys
yeah.
acclimated with whatever the plan, all these things. Then about a week or so in, we get the pads on, and then things really take off from there. Is that for you? Like everything else is still set up until we get to whatever day the pads come out.
Well, yeah, no, it's a process. You gotta be prepared for it. Astronauts don't just get in the capsule and go to the moon. They prep and prepare. You gotta get your body conditioned for it. So it's like an OTA. All I know is that we're not far away from it, from having a real practice. And to me, the first real practice is against the Ravens and the joint practice. It's not real until it's somebody you don't like, because they're not gonna. You don't clip your own people. You don't hit your own people unless you can see in their eyes. But you got to condition for this because September is imperative. Playing within your division, no excuses. We have to win September. And in order to win September, you can't play tag in the summer. It's not going to be sufficient. You have got to practice football. And if they do that the right way, then we got a chance to win.
I know you've said this to me in the past. I'm sure I've heard you say this on the radio that like the only way to get better at football is to play football. Uh,
To play football and hate practice.
right.
Practice is not designed for you to be satisfied or delighted. It is you preparing yourself for torture and you're trying to build up a resistance. And so it's abnormal to get kicked in the shin, get kicked in the gut, get kicked in the throat, and not quit and not just go, not my day. No, get back to the huddle. You got 30 seconds to reboot and go back again. And that's what you have to do. And they look, they practice hard. Don't get me wrong. They practice hard, but unless it's live, and some elements of being live full tilt, then you're experimenting until the game. If your first the time you're nervous or scared is the game, it's too late.
Th- Practice is one thing, the preseason games are another, but there's always the fear of, oh no, we don't want to get guys hurt now because this matters in terms of building up, but the games are where you get paid. That's where the real things happen. What for you is that line of, and this is maybe again more of a preseason thing of putting getting guys exposed to contact and other versus, to get ready for the season versus don't want them to get hurt because again, like we have a ways to go before we get to preseason. But I think we have to we're gonna have that conversation. Should they be playing more? Should the starters play more? And that's gonna be a question that sort of kind of lingers all summer. Where are you on that?
This is where your coaches have to. It's not a blanket statement. I'm not testing Tunsil. He's battle tested.
Right, right, right.
He's already got the seal of approval. I need him to get a couple tastes of it, sip the soup, and I don't need him in there. But Connolly, those other guys in there, they've got to storm the Bastille. They got to go through the process, and he'll be fine at it because these kids are very aggressive. They hustle. They've got great aptitude. I'm not worried about any of them, but it's just I don't want their first bullets to be Michael Parsons. I don't want what last year happened.
Right.
The guy's first live bullets, he's playing against the best pass rusher on the planet. And it's not fair. He did well, but well could get your quarterback decapitated. It's
And
not well enough. That was an ignorant ass approach. And
and
so
yeah.
you gotta use some common sense and then some football knowledge. And especially if you're gonna drop back like that clown show last year, you're doing that fashion show look. If we're teeing off and running going downhill, we'll be fine. But that's the whole, what Blau, it's about his philosophy. He was in Detroit with Coach Lunatic. So I know we're coming downhill, we're coming off tackle. We're not going to have to beg to run the ball anymore. I think it's going to be normal.
I grew up obviously on the Hogs and you guys and Joe Gibbs and all that. So that was where I got my football education for the most part. And because that team was so focused on the offensive line was an outsized piece of that group compared to almost any other Super Bowl champions we've ever had. Um, to me, that's like the idea of football. I don't mean like the tough guy thing, though that was key. But I'm not a tough guy. But the
Too much
idea of
strategy.
yeah, the idea of being physical, that we're going to wear you down, we're going to hit you, we're going to all that, and that being a thing. And what it said to me was also it was one of the first times I realized that the tone for any team is sort of set at the top. Now that can be the ownership, but just in terms of the football stuff, that's the coach and then maybe some of the main players, and it's what you choose to do that sets a tone. And you mentioned, it didn't sound like you were a big fan necessarily of what we had in the offense going on last year, the style, and
You a
you weren't.
fan? Well, no, don't put it on me. You like 5-12?
No, I mean, I started, people know like the end of last year, before the rumors were even starting, I was like looking at this going, okay, if this offense is all that, how come nobody else in the league is even close to doing what they're doing in terms of no huddle, in
Because
terms
it
of
doesn't
shotgun?
produce wins.
Right,
It's
right,
eye candy on
right.
the girl in the fashion show who didn't win either because she had bad breath. So either way you look
Yeah,
at it, we're talking about elevating a guy, applauding a guy who never wins.
right.
He's never in the winner's circle.
That's
He's
why the
never
first
in the
year.
last games.
Right. That's why I love the first year was so confusing. I mean, look, there were a lot of people who questioned the Kingsbury offense when the hire was made, but the first year was obviously very electric. How much of
Oh,
that
I
was
like
him?
him. Great guy. I ain't mad
Yeah,
at
yeah.
him.
Cliff is
He's not lying to anybody. He didn't falsify his resume.
absolutely not.
His resume is what it is. And you bought into it, and then you let him run the damn team. He was
Right.
more than an offensive coordinator. Don't BS yourself.
Yeah. I
Because
did one.
if Quinn was in charge, then he'd have got him to do what he wanted him to do.
Right. Well, and I do think that's ultimately right. Like to some degree, Quinn clearly wanted to do something different on offense, and Kingsbury, like you said, is hey, this is kind of what I do, and that was the questions I was asking at the end of the year, and
Yeah.
Kingsbury was kind of like,
What's
this
wrong
is
with that picture? The head coach asking a coordinator for permission to run the team the way he wants to run it? Man, get the hell out of here.
So, okay,
Yeah.
so now Blau is here. Obviously, we haven't seen anything. Blau is a big mystery because of the fact that he's barely been a coach in the league, let alone at a coordinator role calling the offense, but he has been a quarterback. Any feel so far in terms of that tone? Not, we'll see about the play calling, but like just the
Hey,
tone aspect.
yeah, he passed Coach Caveman's test. You
Okay.
don't work in Detroit and be soft. They don't have that. They don't. I mean, the Lions. I hope they didn't miss their window, but it can happen because I like the way Dan Campbell approaches the game because he's all Neanderthal. It's the line of scrimmage. That's why he values his offensive line. More Pro Bowlers on his offensive line than any other. But that's the way it's built. It's a Gibbs bugle type approach. Everything is a line of scrimmage. Everything. Whereas most of these young people now, they spend most of their conversation about the wide receiver position.
Right.
And it's just so ass backwards, but it fits they're impatient. They got to be satisfied immediately, and winning is never their priority. It's always the fashion show as opposed to results.
You,
The
you know,
problem is we just got too many people now in sports that are using calculators and turning this into a chemistry project. They don't care about who wins.
it's interesting you say that, I preach about this all the time. Obviously, you need receivers. That's, not arguing that, but
Love them,
w but
love
but
them.
but in terms of, like, the investment to the overall pie of the roster, one guy, go for it, but more
Third
and
place.
if you wanna use a first round pick on another guy, that's fine because the money won't be spent for all, but in terms of, like, multiple investments, unless you're keeping your guy the way, like, the Bengals did, I don't that's just not the way to go, and one thing I'll say is, like, I know people still question, like, does Adam Peters, know what he's doing or whatever? Uh the investment, like they make a trade for Tunsil, they re-sign him, they draft Connerly in the first round. They easily could have just said, "Hey, we have Brandon Coleman, we're good." Like, but there's like, no, we think we need to do a little bit more. They give Cosme a massive extension as well. You see what they've been spending on the defensive line to go to the other side. And yeah, we can say they need more receiver. There are questions about that second receiver spot, but it's better the question there to me than it is who's playing tackle. Who do you have pass rushers, which they didn't obviously last year. So I at least like the way he's been going in that respect. Well, how it works out, I don't know, but the investments I think make sense.
Yeah, I agree. You got to know what you need. I think they've learned the lesson now, and they realize that we got to go inside out. So that running back room is going to hold some weight. The wide receiver room, I think, is nice. I love the kid out of Clemson. I think that bringing Brown back was huge. Um, I'm not mad at him. He got 10 mil. But if you ask him after the fact, would you rather have paid him and not have been in last place last year? And I think it would have been unanimous. Yeah, we effed up. You don't
It-
get rid of something that works and you're 12-5.
right,
You just don't do that. You got cocky and you got burnt by it. And don't blame injuries because that's just a sign of lack of depth.
right.
You pick all the players. So you telling me your backups are terrible? They can't play? You picked them. So if you picked them and then you train them, somewhere along the line is a breakdown. It's impossible to pick the right people and get the wrong results unless the
Yeah.
people training them don't know what they're doing or you boo-booed in the selection. Stand up to it. And I think that's what they're done. That's what they're doing. And I believe they'll get it fixed.
Before I let you go, because I know you got to get on the radio here. People are asking about what is Doctor with the tight ends. Obviously, a great question. They bring in Chigakonkwu. I think this is potentially a bigger year for Ben Sinnott. Where are you at with those guys in that room?
Well, the Concord was a beast. I mean, that's going to be well. Last year they were proficient at that position, and it was a catch and move the sticks move. Now you got a chance, a guy who catch, hit the sticks, and the end zone because the game doesn't start for him until after the catch. And so last year the catch was there, and he was spectacular at it. We've just added now not only the catch, but now we've got production after the catch. And for the guy, man, he's an exceptional athlete. Um, Cynic, all those guys. They got to get off the potty or leave a mess. But I can't keep going on and on about Cynic and all these guys. Either we picked, and I loved them in college. What's the disconnect? I think Bly will open those doors for you.
Yeah. No, and by the way, like I think the Ben Sinnott draft pick to me is like a really good example of like Peters clearly had a vision, but that vision did not match what Kingsbury wanted to do. And because, like you were saying, Kingsbury had a lot of sway, that Senate just didn't factor in. So that's why I'm not willing to say, well, he looks like a bust. I'm just willing to say, hey, let's see now in an offense that probably is going to use him a little bit more.
Yeah,
We'll see. And the same thing with the Conqueror. Like I think they're going to use more like back in the day when you were playing and they had essentially a two tight end offense. I know it's an H back, but
yeah.
I think it's going to be more of that this year, and I think that should be helpful.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope it gets to more than 5 wins
Yeah,
because the offensive coordinator last year was a gorilla pimp. And everybody else scared to death of him. So you should have let him pick the players. Since you couldn't coach him, you couldn't influence him, you should have had him picking his own players.
right.
That was a mistake.
Um, I hear it, Doc. I don't want to hold you up. I really appreciate you're so kind to me, and I also, it's ironic that you're here. That you jumped in today. You wouldn't know this, but today is the 1 year anniversary of Last Man Standing of the Substack. So I greatly appreciate you've been one of my big champions, my big supporters for the last several years. So I really
Well, I'm a
appreciate the fact.
regular listener, and of course, we got our property here at Burgundy and Gold today, and so we just keep it rolling, man. That's what we do, man. We teammates.
I couldn't have a better teammate. I mean, I've said this to you before, but like the fact that I have this ball behind me, your autograph is right there from the 1983 team that lost the Super Bowl. But to
It's
have you
okay.
here,
Hey, look,
you
getting
still
in
got
it,
there.
getting in it. You got to live it. You earn it. We lived it. We failed in that, but if I fail on the final of the last play of the game, the final game, I
Right,
got to live with that.
right.
But you can still call me champion. You just can't put world on it. You got to call it the NFC.
I hear. Well, you did get a ring the year before, so
Yeah.
you think you're doing all
Well, we
right.
got 2 rings. We got the look. They give you a ring for winning the NFC Championship too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
for sure. So anyway, Doc, I greatly appreciate it, man. Enjoy it. Good luck on the show today. I'm
Thanks,
sure I
brother.
will talk to you if you
Good
whenever you
luck
need.
tomorrow on it when you got this. You in this air chair.
I
Later,
appreciate it.
brother.
See ya.
Peace.
All right, that was an unexpected treat, but a great one. The great Rick Doc Walker uh, joining there. Uh, For sure. All right. So you guys got some other questions here. As I said, Mark Bullock should be joining us shortly. So we'll get into more with Mark about some specific things. Let me answer some of your questions that have popped up here. We mentioned the Senate one, and I apologize. There were other questions when the thread closed. I don't know what happened. I'm crazy. Uh, I need a producer. All right. So the question was, what does Doc think about the proposed change to a 3-4 defense, and will we finally get a team that can tackle this year? I really am fascinated by the the idea of the 3-4 versus the 4-3. Again, from the perspective of it feels like to me, and you guys can tell me if you think I'm wrong here. Rotation aside, almost regardless of whether it's 3-4 or 4-3, here are the people that are going to be on the field in some way, shape, or form, right? We think Deron Payne, Javon Kinlaw, either they're the tackles or they're the ends on a 3-4, right? You've got Adafe Owe and Kaylavon Chason as the edge guys, right? Whether they're either the 4-3 ends or they're the 3-4 edge rushers, right? Sonny Styles, we're gonna just say he's there as the green dot guy. We'll see how that works. And um, either Chanel or Luvu is there all the time. You know what I mean? Like some combination of that. So that leaves essentially one spot. And that question is that one spot better used for a Tim Settle type as a nose tackle? I'm presuming Deron Payne is not going to be a nose tackle. I just don't think that's the best way to utilize his potential playmaking. So, or they prefer to have Tim Settle essentially out there, or do they prefer to have the Frankie Louvu, Leo Chenal, have the other guy out there? I just think that's a really interesting thing. And again, we'll get into with Dorrance Armstrong fitting in there somewhere, and could Jordan McGee make an impact, and Johnny Newton, and all those types of things. But in general, it is that the idea of where do they think is it a talent or is it a scheme situation? I do think that is very, very fascinating. Um, to me, for sure. Obviously, and speaking of Armstrong, a big story here will obviously be where are the injured guys, because most of them are on defense. Dorrance Armstrong, Dietrich Wise, Tim Settle, Trey Amos, none of those guys were around in the offseason program because they were coming off of injuries from last year. It sounded like the recovery was going fine. As best I can tell, that's been the case. Um, they don't have to tell us anything about updates, but I suspect we'll hear from Dan Quinn when camp opens as to whether any of these guys are going to be ready with day one, or they have to wait, or they go on pup list, or any of those kinds of things. So we will see about that, but that is a big deal. Tony, is there a bigger mystery box in the NFL this year than the defense? New first time DC, 6 or 7 new starters, a new green dot guy. Yeah, it's a big question. I had somebody the other day say to me, "Hey, they have a lot of extra linemen and linebackers. They may have extra. Should they trade any of them for receiver help?" And my basic reaction was, "Well, on paper they have some depth, but we don't know really what they have of anything. I mean, even the like Owe, who looks to be, looks like a very good player. Don't get me wrong, but it's a bit different, right? I mean, last year at the Chargers, he had a Khalil Mack as a guy that they would focus on. The Ravens, not necessarily him. The Ravens have always had a bunch of guys defensively, so Oweh wasn't always necessarily the main guy. To a degree, he's going to be the main guy here now. Defense is focused on, right? So how does that go? I'm not saying that it would be an issue, but sacks, we focus so much on sacks. Sacks are just, if you get one sack a game, that's 17 sacks. But what did you do on all the other plays, right? And I think Oweh will be a contributor. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying I can sit here and tell you he'll be a Pro Bowler, but it doesn't mean anything because I haven't even seen anything. Same thing with Sonny Styles. Do we love the athleticism? Of course. Do we love the potential? Yes. Does he seem like a very grounded, smart kid who's coming in with no like massive ego? All positives, all true. But he's still got to play. I mean, we don't know. We'll have to see how it goes. But I'm more optimistic, as I think all of us should be, about the defense. Yeah, there's some questions at corner. I would definitely say that they at least added some depth with the Rasul Douglas signing. But yeah, there's a lot of questions there. There's no doubt about it. APS, what's a typical day in Vegas look like for LMS other than attending the summer league games? Well, there's on the record Ben and there's off the record Ben. No, I'm pretty tame these days in Vegas. In my 20s and 30s, it was maybe another story, but I'm pretty tame these days. Yeah, this was the first time I've been to Summer League many times over the years, going back to John Wall's first year. But this was the first time since I guess COVID that I went credentialed media. And the Wizards had a lot going on. Not only was it AJ DeBonta's debut, but the Trae Young signing, they had the press conference to discuss that. So there was a lot of things there. So it was actually a pretty good timing to do that. And I said this, I think, in the earlier um, uh, chat that I'm curious about how you guys are feeling about more Wizards content. I know there's a lot of crossover, but I also know there's some people who are like, no, don't mess with my Commander stuff. I've really tried to separate them both on the podcast as well as here, but at the same time, I need. By the way, I should say this is Sammy. This is a new addition to Lenny Got a Friend. So there you go. They can see Sammy. She's everywhere. I got to lock her out of the room. Anyway, um, I just hope you guys are cool with it. I mean, I do obviously from a business perspective, having more people who are interested in the Wizards jump in is helpful. It's also good for me and my soul because that's a team that I covered for many years before. And I think hopefully what I've shown you already, not over the last couple months from the Anthony Davis trade signing on, is um, that I have some. Not only do I have some good insight, but I also have access. I'm not just gonna like throw out. I think this has been indicative of my Commanders coverage as well. I'm not throwing out hot takes per se. Sometimes I got some fun, but in general, it's grounded thoughts. Trying to really look at all sides of this as I did with the Trae Young story, and I think that's something that's really key. And that for that beat, there's really not much coverage going on these days. And the Commanders beat, there's more. Well, this is actually gonna be a pretty interesting year because there's now more beats on board after the Washington Post blew up. But so I don't, more is not always better in terms of the like what coverage are we getting? I think we do have a unique point of view here in that it's not just regurgitating what we're being told. It's hearing what we're being told and then looking deeper into that. Is this what does this really mean? Is this real? Do I buy this? What else am I thinking or whatever? I think all that factors in. So hopefully, like I said, the Wizards, it's not just some attempt at grabbing some more subscribers. It's an actual news reporting try here to be more thoughtful about that beat, but also to, like I said, I enjoy talking about it anyway. So might as well do it for a little bit real. By the way, I don't think like in terms of the Commander season, I wouldn't worry about me going out to Wizards too often. I'll be Commanders focused until that season's over, and then I'll talk about it on the podcast, and maybe right here and there. But it's not going to be like I'm going to cover every game. Don't. If that's a concern, don't let that be a concern. Oh, the great Liam Griffin. You're now in charge of the RFK Stadium. What's one design, feature, amenity you're making sure the Commanders have for their new home? I mean, should I be selfish here and just say the press box on the 50-yard line and parking for the media? No. Okay, I won't go there. What is a design feature amenity that you're making sure have to have? I mean, I'd love to know what you guys think because you guys are the actual people that sit in the crowd these days. I mean, I guess I would probably just say, and this is maybe easier said than done, but you've got to figure out the ins and the outs of the stadium. I mean, I know the question's more about the game day part of it, but it makes or breaks the experience if you can't get in on quickly or you can't get out in a reasonable amount of time. And I know that can again be easier said than done. Where they're going to be relying on metro a lot. It's not going to be as much car situation um as the current setup. I do think there is some the roads around RFK are actually set up as actually, I think, a pretty decent for the city. You know, it's right near some uh, main roads, I guess you could just say, that get people in and out. So I just think that's got to be a huge, huge deal. And other than that, I think the other like I look at Seattle's stadium, right? It's not an indoor stadium. It's an outdoor stadium, and yet somehow they have one of the louder stadiums in the league, and they did a great job with their acoustics there. The overhang on the upper decks, you know, I guess it just keeps the noise in, that type of deal. This is going to be a, not dome per se, but, it's going to be a covered stadium. Figure that out. Make it be an actual advantage to be there as the home crowd. Be loud. Do whatever you have to do for that. Obviously, I'm assuming they're going to have the big screens and all the food that you want and all those types of things. I'm assuming that's baked in to some degree, right? Also very important, but you gotta have the sound good, and like I said, the access to in and the out. It just makes or breaks the day. Steve is saying, uh, yeah, over in the EPL world, that's a make or break as well. 100%. Reduced ticket prices for fans traveling from the UK and Ireland. Hey, I'm sure if you talk to Mark Klaus and you can commit to X amount of people showing up, that he would more than happily um, uh, take that and go from there. I think that's that's gonna be the other interesting thing is just the season tickets in general, right? I mean, like, the PSLs are a lot. It's just a lot of money. Now, fortunately, it's not a ton of games, but the money's not nothing. So even like for this site, I don't like how people spend their money is how they spend their money. And obviously, I can't look at the economy today and say that's what it's going to be like in 4 years because that's probably not going to be the case. Hopefully, it'll be a lot better. But there's always something that, whether it's price of gas, rent, bananas, something is always going to be uh, a little more expensive. So how do you factor that in? All right, let's see. I got another one here. No thanks is asking any potential of a training camp trade a la Jahan Dotson. I keep thinking about whether Payne fits his defense. Um, this is a question I've gotten a lot, both because it's like it's an intrigue one about the roster, but also because last year I had the Brian Robinson thing. I would say I had the Jahan Dotson thing to a degree in terms of Spidey sense, and I was looking up something the other day, and uh, even going back to 2019, I had or 20 no, yeah, 2019, I had Josh Dotson not making the team. Like the camp had just started, and I was like, I don't think he's making the team, and then he didn't. So I've had some good success there. All that said, I'm going to need a minute to figure it all out because we got to see them practice. I mean, we got to see them actually get out there, and it's not just practice, but hear what they say. Hear what when Dan Quinn, the way he talked about Jahan Dotson to a degree, I was like, I don't know that Jahan Dotson fits there, as we just sort of talked about with Doc, like the physical mindset that they want to have. And then when he played an inordinate amount of snaps in the preseason opener, I was like, okay, I don't think this is a guy that they're banking on as being a main piece to the puzzle. Somebody we do bank on being a main piece of the puzzle here has joined us, and it's the great Mark Bullock. I like to see the smile on your face. I wasn't sure what kind of state you'd be in a week out. I don't even want to bring it up, but how? First of all, thank you for being here. How are you holding up?
Yeah, all good. I'm sorry I'm running a little bit late. The old cat got his insulin late because he didn't want to eat, so we had to wait for him to eat to give him his insulin. So yeah, I'm running a bit late, but other than that, I'm all good. Have recovered from the World Cup. I'm still a little bit angry about the way it happened, but I have recovered and I've gotten over it for the most part.
Do you, I mean, obviously, like, fans will do the whole like, you know, I would move this guy here and this guy there. Do you find yourself, because of the nature of what you do here, talking about the Commanders, of like focusing on a lot about formations and tactics in ways that maybe you wouldn't if you were a fan, or do you try to keep it all separate? Like, no, 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 I'm just going to be a pure fan here. I don't care about, you know, being the
No,
smart guy.
the way I've always approached sports has been more that kind of analytical, tactical approach of things. That's kind of what drew me to the NFL. Like the story I always like to tell is, uh, I used to watch a lot of football or soccer with my dad growing up, and we'd watch it on TV together. And he would always get angry and yell and shout at the referee and be like, "What are you doing? That's a terrible decision. And that's a red card. What are you doing? Come on, ref." And then he'd get angry at a player that mishit a pass. He'd be like, "You can't even hit a 5 yard pass. What's all of this?" And I'd sit there being like, "Why are you getting so upset? Like the it's just a game." And I never liked that approach, that kind of pure fandom approach. So my response to that was, well, I'm going to go in a different way and be like, well, why did that guy miss hit that pass?
Right.
And kind of look back at like, oh, maybe it was because this guy was out of position and what have you. So that led me to being a little bit more analytical in how I approach things, and then that led me to like the NFL. With soccer, it's a constant ongoing game unless it's an American World Cup where they introduce it and turn it into 4 quarters rather than two halves. But we'll ignore the hydration break thing. So yeah, with the NFL, it's an individual play after an individual play. It's line up, play, stop, line up, play, stop, and that makes it a lot easier to break down each individual play, and that kind of was uh fit my mindset of how to approach sports. And so yeah, I do still, that's a long way of saying, yeah, I do still kind of view soccer in the same way that I would watch any sport, is kind of analytically of why certain things are happening and how certain things are happening.
All right. Well, I'll get you off that topic. I don't want you to have to relive any of that. I get it. But you make an interesting point there that, like soccer, like basketball, like hockey, it's a fluid game. I mean, the coaching matters, but it's before the game. Really, there's not much you can do in the game when there's a free flowing situation. I mean, you can change a lineup or whatever, but like it's not like the coach can't say, "Hey, Bellingham, you're going down the field, throw it to, kick it to Harry Kane." You can't. Like, it's just going to happen. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But in football, obviously, the control is all in the coaches, for the most part, right? Because they have every single play. They determine what's going to happen, unless the quarterback audibles or whatever. They're going to determine what happens, and so that is, from your seat, that is, I imagine, why the NFL is more interesting in some ways, because of that. Whatever they do with practice, even for us who go right practice, I don't see practice. So it's all a big blind spot, but the game is the actual game. So I imagine that is why this is all interesting. And then in terms of this team, that's got to make this really interesting, because we have no idea really what we're going to get out of Durante Jones and David Blau, other than the generics of where they came from. So, but like, that, it's a big mystery for all of us.
Yeah, it's a fun one to try to figure out. You kind of try to put the puzzle pieces together. You go back and look at, like, I've spent a lot of time watching the Vikings defense this past year, and I spent a lot of time this offseason watching the Detroit Lions 2023 offense with Ben Johnson, and some of the Bears offense with Ben Johnson this year, and kind of comparing those two, and kind of seeing what the blueprints are for those coaches coming for David Blau and Durante Jones coaching coming here. And obviously they're going to do different things in their own way, and it's not going to be the exact same. But that's kind of like they're hired from those systems to do those things, right? So you expect them to be somewhat similar, and then you try to piece together the different puzzle pieces of, Washington's done a really good job this offseason, in my opinion, of adding a lot of guys to the front seven that are very versatile and fit what that Viking scheme did, where they have, you know, inside linebackers that can line up in the A gap and blitz. They can drop back and cover. They can shift to the edge and rush off the edge. You have safeties that can kind of work down into the box and play as linebackers. They can play deep as two deep safeties, and play all these different roles. And you have all these different versatile pieces. And I think Washington has done a pretty good job of adding a bunch of those pieces that make you kind of, when you piece it all together, you're like, okay, it's starting to resemble this part of what the Vikings did and this part of what the Vikings did, but this piece isn't quite there, so maybe they're going to have to adapt in this way. So that's kind of the fun part of it, and hopefully once we get to sort of training camp and preseason, we'll actually start to see, okay, this is how they're putting it together, and if I've done my job properly, we'll see whether I'm right. And if I've done my job wrong, then we'll see I'm probably very wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I think at a baseline level, it seems like you're on the right track because we're all, I think, on that same general track. So because there's so much new out there, right? If I said to you, okay, Mark, I can give you a live camera, will record everything that's going to happen in practice, but only for this player or this position. What, what in isolation are you like? Boy, I really wish I could see. If I could only see one thing, I'd want to see this the most.
Um, well, I think I know what the offense is going to be. I think I know the offense is going to be that kind of wide zone run scheme, play action, Jaden Daniels rolling out on bootlegs, and then the passing game will be the passing game, but it's going to be more run game and play action. So I think I have a pretty good idea that's what it's going to be. I guess I would pick whoever is the Mike linebacker. And I don't think we know that right now. You might know a little bit better than the rest of us because you're there at practice, but you might not necessarily be able to say that. You've been there at some OTA practices at least. Uh, I think I remember seeing a Leo Chanel interview the other day where he kind of let slip, I've been playing Mike linebacker. And so that maybe he's their Mike linebacker, but I would think Sonny Styles would probably be the guy that they want to play there. So whoever that Mike linebacker is, that's the guy I would like to focus the camera on and see what he's doing, because that would kind of give you an idea of what everyone else is doing around him. And yeah, and that would give me a greater picture of what this defense is likely going to be. So that would be, I can't necessarily nail down the exact player, but I can say the position I want the Mike linebacker.
I would be surprised if it's not Styles. I was saying before, I think right before you came on, like, we can all assume that somebody was asking, is the defense like the biggest mystery in the NFL this year? And certainly it's got to be one of them. And on paper, there looks like it's way better, right? Younger, faster, more depth. But until they play, I mean, who knows, right? I mean, that's the whole point of any of this. Everything we're all talking about in advance is just educated guesses at best, how it all plays out. I mean, who had the Kansas City Chiefs being so bad last year, they were going to get a top 10 pick, right? You never know how these things go. But speaking of the defense, I also was talking about this before, and you're a perfect person to ask this. So we're all sort of saying, like, okay, 3-4, but 4-3, they'll switch it around. But like 3-4, like we're thinking more in those terms at a very basic level. Now, I could sit here and say that, like, on almost any given play, rotations aside, we can assume that Deron Payne and Javon Kinlaw will be on the field. We can assume Owe and Caleb Chason will be on the field. Let's, for argument, to say Sonny Styles is the Mike, right? And then it's either Chenal or Luvu, like one of them. But then there's the seventh player. And the wonder is it a talent or a scheme fit? In other words, if it's a talent fit, would you rather have Tim Settle on the field than Frankie Luvu? Or is it a scheme fit? No, we want the 3-4 look because of how it'll put pressure on the other team and how other guys can flow off of it, etc. What do you think is like the ultimate decision there, and how would you kind of weigh that if you think that's a reasonable debate?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It is kind of who that seventh player is. Is it a defensive lineman or a linebacker? And I think the way they will go is a defensive lineman. Now, I will preface this with saying Durante Jones has been in a lot of different places and been in a lot of different schemes. He's run 3-4, he's run 4-3. He will likely have looks and packages where they do both things. So it won't always be one or the other. That they'll switch between the fronts. But if you go back to that Vikings defense last year, and that is the one that, Durante Jones has been in the NFL for a long time. The time he's finally got a defensive coordinator gig is coming out of that Vikings defense. So you'd imagine he's wanting to replicate that defense as much as possible. Now, that one of the key fundamental parts of that Vikings defense is they played a lot of base defense, meaning they kept their 3-4 front on the field, despite facing 11 personnel. Even if there was a third receiver on the field, they would keep that base front on the field. And when they switched, they wouldn't take when they went to nickel or a big nickel package. They wouldn't take one of the defensive linemen off the field. They would take one of the linebackers off the field for a third safety or a slot corner. And they did that because they wanted to keep those 3 big interior linemen on the field to help them control the run game. And the whole core of that defense is you have those 3 big bodies up front that can control the run game, and that allows you to keep 2 safeties back deep. That allows you to disguise all these different looks and line all these different people up all over the place. Because at the core of the defense, you've got these 3 big mauling defensive linemen that can stuff the run and keep you sound, even if you are short of a gap, because you only have 7 men in the box because you're keeping a safety back, an extra safety back deep. So that is a core piece of that Vikings defense. So I would imagine that Durante Jones coming from that system, and as I said, this is the one time he's finally been hired as a defensive coordinator. I would think he would want to keep that core principle as part of his foundation for this defense. So I would think it's going to be a third defensive lineman on the field to help them control that run game, and keep them sound against the run. And then they have all these different pieces that they can bring in at linebacker and at safety and disguise and blitz as much as they want with the rest of them. But I think they will want that third defensive tackle on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. That seems logical, but like I said, I guess it's because Tim Settle has largely been a high rotation guy, but not like a every down starter, or defensive linemen are not always every down guy. The guy's not been out there a ton, and it's like, okay, wait, if we're saying Deron Payne is not a nose tackle, which I don't think he is, I don't think that makes good use of his talents. I don't think Javon Kinlaw is necessarily big enough to do that. I mean, they're all huge, but I don't think that's him either. So you're looking at Tim Settle and like DJ Davidson, and that becomes, like I said, that's where it gets interesting. Like, I'm not saying like Frankie Louvu or Chenal has to be on the field all the time, but where's that line of defense? Or even if it's like the nickel back, a third safety versus, which I know you wrote about the other day. Like, how does that all play? So I just do think that's an interesting situation. But I agree with you. To start off, it feels like they want to replicate what they did in Minnesota for the reasons you laid out. So it's probably going to be that guy. I assume Settle is going to be back sooner than later. We'll see. So obviously that could be a factor as well. Can we talk about the offense for a second?
Sure, of course.
We're not going to mention any names of anybody from the outside. You know who they all might be if they were to bring somebody in, but I don't have a lot of sense that there's activity, but obviously they're pretty coy with their actions. We'll see. Assuming that they don't do anything interesting. Who for you, other than McLaurin, and maybe the answer is too easy, maybe this is just obviously Antonio Williams, but who for you is the most interesting of the guys who could potentially step up? And maybe they don't, look, we keep saying they wanted an obvious number 2 guy. Maybe they're happy to have the rotation. But that said, who's like the most interesting guy for you, whether it's for a bigger role or a smaller role or whatever it is for you at that in that receiver room?
Yeah, I think the low hanging fruit there is Antonio Williams, because I think they did. Like, I know Adam Peters talks a lot about we think you can play outside and inside. I think when you look at the offense that they're likely trying to replicate, that 2023 Lions offense, and you go, if you actually go through the statistics that season, like there was Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was the slot receiver, who had a ton of targets and a ton of catches and had a great year. And then your next highest pass catchers were the tight ends and the running backs. Like the outside receivers didn't do so much in that offense. Now, obviously, Washington has Terry McLaurin. At the time, the Lions had Jameson Williams. They still have him, obviously, but at the time, Williams was was kind of a young receiver that hadn't earned his stripes at that point, and he was starting to towards the end of that year. But they weren't targeting him as often. So McLaurin factors into that, and that will change that offense a little bit. But primarily, that Lions offense worked through what I like to say is an interior trio of Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot, Sam Laporta at tight end, and then Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield. That was the kind of interior trio of pass catchers that kind of made the offense work on a down to down basis. So um, I think if Antonio Williams can come in and win that slot receiver job straight away and play that the Amon-Ra St. Brown role that he has the skill set to play. I'm not saying he is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's drawn obviously a lot of comparisons to him, but he still has a lot to go to become that type of a player. But he has that kind of profile that can fit that role. So I think he would be one that if he can earn that job early on, then that would really help the offense go. That would give them the kind of the slot receiver, the St. Brown profile. They have a Okonkwo who kind of does the Sam Laporta profile in terms of the pass catcher, athletic pass catcher. And then out of the backfield, they obviously don't have a Jahmyr Gibbs, but Rashad White is a good pass catcher out of the backfield. I wonder if we'll see a little bit more of Bill getting some more opportunities out of the backfield and see if they can get him the ball in his hands a little bit more and get him some more touches that way. So they've got a couple of options there. But yeah, they don't necessarily have another Amon-Ra St. Brown profile. So if Antonio Williams is the guy that can step into that role, then he'd be the one that I think would stand out the most to me.
You mentioned the idea of Amon-Ra St. Brown is a slot guy. Now I just looked it up just for my own education in terms of per PFF in terms of where he lined up last year. 446 snaps in the slot, but 479 wide. Now that's because when they're going with two wide receivers, he obviously doesn't leave the field, right? So that's what that means. But the slot number is a huge number, and this is where I think the Antonio Williams part gets interesting, right? Because I did not really consider him. I've said it before at that number 71 pick, in large part because I was viewing him as a slot guy, and they've already got Jalen Lane and McCaffrey, and more to the point, they just needed an outside guy. So I was looking at those type of profiles. So that's why I was like, okay, wait, is this going to play outside? But okay, if it's more of that mix, like this 50-50 balance here, okay, well then maybe you can get behind that a little bit. Obviously, I don't think he's going to play 900 snaps necessarily, but we'll see. So I think that gets interesting. But also, you mentioned, Okonkwo. Again, we can't say too much about what you see at practice, but if they're going to have two tight ends out on the field, which I think they pretty much have said is going to be like a pretty, maybe even the base look. John Bates is going to be in line. So if Okonkwo is not going to be in a slot, and so always, and one way to take advantage of his athleticism is maybe to move him outside, or he'll have a speed advantage on linebackers and size advantage on defensive backs and all that fun stuff. I'm intrigued by that aspect. Is it possible that Antonio Williams ends up being the slot guy because Okonkwo ends up playing more on the outside, or they just mix and match those two guys to some degree? Again, they're going to balance it. And they're going to, Diami's going to play, and all these guys are going to play. But at a base level, what's it going to look like? I wonder if that's ultimately what they get, because otherwise, there's not necessarily a slot guy per se out there.
Yeah, sorry, are you hearing the rain just coming down on the windows? I don't know if that's coming through on my phone or not. Are you hearing the rain? It's
Not really. I did
no.
notice. I didn't hear you said, but we assume that's raining over there always. So
So it just started coming down real heavy, so I didn't want it to interrupt things. Yeah, so I think it's a good point. If they are using a lot of 12 personnel, two tight end personnel, um, Antonio Williams can effectively become a slot receiver even in two receiver sets. And there's a couple ways of doing that. One, as you say, you can move Okonkwo outside. You can do kind of a trip set with McLaurin on the outside and Okonkwo on the inside and Antonio Williams in the slot. You can kind of a lot of two tight end sets nowadays. You put two tight ends on one side of the line. You can put your two receivers on the other side of the line. So McLaurin would be outside and Antonio Williams would be in the slot there, and that's still a two receiver set, and he's in the slot. And you can obviously like stack the receivers together. McLaurin and Williams could stack together, and that would effectively make him the slot receiver. So there's a lot of those different things you can do in those two tight end sets, which would get Antonio Williams into the slot. And like you said with the Amon-Ra St. Brown number this year, where he had 400 snaps as an outside receiver, I suspect if you actually count the number of snaps that were outside the numbers, it would be significantly lower. Like
Right.
an outside receiver in those 2 tight end sets is going to like they would have him aligned tight to the formation in very tight splits, almost acting as another tight end or a slot receiver anyway. So yeah, I would imagine that would be the kind of way they would go with Williams. That like I think he could perform fine on the outside, but I don't think that's what this offense is necessarily looking for. I think they are looking to work the middle of the field with those interior guys, the tight end, the slot receiver. It's going to be interesting to see how Blau mixes that philosophy that he was with the Lions in 2023 and adding in kind of a number one receiver in McLaurin that, he's already said, I want to get him 10 targets a game. Now, obviously, that's just coach speak, I think, but he's going to be a priority in the offense. So you then have to mix in this kind of philosophy of, well, we attack the middle of the field with this interior trio. But we've also got this outside threat that, McLaurin, it deserves his targets. So that is going to be interesting to see how if he blends that all together. But yeah, I think Williams they can quite easily get him in the slot, even in 2 receiver sets, by mixing, matching the looks and stuff.
All right, before I let you go back to your playing out in the rain, let's talk about the quarterback again. The big mystery box with David Blau's offense. We think we know what's going to happen, but we haven't seen, and yada yada yada. And also ultimately, really, what any of these guys do is not going to matter until we see it in week 1 and so on. The question though here is put aside the health. That's obviously something that's out of anybody. We can't. He'll play or he won't. We can't do anything about that. But in terms of the rest of it, the actual performance, how he plays, obviously 2024 was beyond magical. I mean, it was, arguably the greatest rookie season ever by not just even a quarterback, but maybe anybody on offense in league history. And then last year, the injuries crushed everything. Only finished 4 games, played only 7. But if we're being honest, I think it's not like even when he was playing last year, that it looked anything consistently like it did in 2024. I remember that first game against the Giants where they won easily, but it was kind of like, yeah, all right. They still got some rust to knock off. It wasn't like a great game. The best game I think the offense looked in all year was the Chargers game.
Yep.
And even that, I thought that was interesting by Jaden was that he was in more control. He seemed to be, he was coming off the injury. He seemed to be like more understanding of like, I can't put myself in harm's way as much. I need to, you know, um, chill out a little bit more. And also Debo had a great game. Bill had a great game, etc. How's he going to beat us here? I'm ultimately like that. I think like we can just sit here and talk about the injuries and everybody, the offense. It's hard to cut you off, but like ultimately, like I think he's going to be fine. But there's the question of what version of Jaden Daniels we're actually getting when he's playing.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I would say that Chargers game, I think you're underselling it a little bit. Like he was rusty in that first quarter because it was his first game back after injury. But he completed a like 3rd and 16 to Jalen Lane, and then everything just clicked at the end of that first quarter. He completed that pass, and then suddenly he just went into this. I thought for those 3 quarters he played as well as he has ever played in any NFL game that I've watched him so far. He was phenomenal with his decision making. He was on time with the ball, but he was also consistently making the correct decisions. He was only using his legs when he had to, and when he did have to use them, he was still explosive and able to pick up first downs and be a real backbreaker that he can be. But he wasn't relying on that stuff. He wasn't putting on the cape and being the superhero. He was just consistently making the right decisions and getting the ball out on time where it needs to be, and they were just moving down the field methodically. And I thought that was like, hey, here's the blueprint. This is the guy we saw in 2024. This is even better than the guy we saw in 2024. This is where he can go. And then he got more injuries, and the season kind of derailed from there. But I think that showed that he still obviously has the talent. And when he puts it all together, it's a phenomenal package. I think the main thing about this switch to David Blau, and it's something I think Dan Quinn has made the priority of this offseason, which was we heard all year that it's like, oh, we want to run the ball, we want to set up play action, but that Cliff Kingsbury's offense never really used play action all that well. And Dan Quinn has experienced it. Like the best year that Dan Quinn had as a head coach was in Atlanta with Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator, and he saw how that offense works firsthand, and how even though he had Matt Ryan, who was like this all-pro superstar quarterback, that offense took so much pressure off of him because the run game was so good, the play action game was so good. It all married up together and it all layered in very nicely. And then when it came to third down, they needed the quarterback. He had enough taken off his plate that he could just step up in those moments and beat Matt Ryan and win the games then. But the rest of the offense could still support him and get him to those points where it wasn't, you know, Matt Ryan versus the defense the entire time. It was the whole offense versus the defense, and then Matt Ryan could take over when needed to. And I think that is what Dan Quinn kind of set out to do this offseason, and that's why he's gone with Blau, who has that. The Ben Johnson offense is kind of the most Shanahan-esque offense that's not directly in the Shanahan tree. It resembles that quite a lot, the commitment to the run game and the layering off of the run game, and the building into play action stuff. I think that's where he wants to get to. I think that's where Dan Quinn ultimately wants to get to, is having a strong fundamental run game built on that kind of wide zone system, having the bootlegs off of that, having the jet sweeps off of that, the screens off of that, the drop back play action passes off of that. You've got all these different layers built in where it becomes a lot easier for the quarterback. Jaden Daniels isn't having to stand in the shotgun and throw 40 times a game and having to make every play on his own. Suddenly you're getting a strong run game. You're getting play action passes, sort of 10 or 15 good play action passes a game that are very easy. It's just an easy throw straight over the middle, like Jaden Daniels can do that in his sleep, right? So it's taking a lot of pressure off of him, and then that can give him the opportunity to, when it gets to those key moments, then that's when he can take over the game. So that's what I think is the whole idea behind going with Blau and this type of offense. I'm still surprised that Dan Quinn didn't want to go for Mike McDaniel, but that's a conversation for probably earlier in the offseason, because that would have been the same style of offense. But um, yeah, I think, that's where I think the offense is going to try to help Jaden Daniels and take that pressure off him and make sure that he's not having to, it's 1st and 10 and he's dropping back to pass and having to scramble and avoid an all-out blitz sort of thing. I think you're trying to run the ball, you're setting up play action, you're making it so that he's only having to be the superhero for 5 to 10 plays a game rather than 20 to 30 plays a game, right? I think that's the template that they want to get to.
No, it's a good analysis there. It's going to be fascinating. Like I said, I mean, the Jaden conversation comes up in part because when they have these top 10 lists of quarterbacks, whether it's whoever's coming up with the list, he's not typically now being on them. Even though last year, going at this point, he was arguably the conversation was, is he going to make the top 4 in the league a top 5? And we weren't discussing whether Caleb Williams or Drake May was ahead of him. Now those guys are definitely ahead of him according to the world. And you know, I'm not a homer by any stretch, but obviously this is the team I focus on. I don't focus on New England, or I don't focus on Chicago. So it's always top of mind here, the good or the bad. And all I can say is that what Jaden did in the 2024 playoffs exceeded whatever either one of those guys did. I think Caleb Williams was fine. Drake May was not good, really throughout the playoffs. So, to me, ultimately, when I judge anybody in sports, and I think one mistake that we all get into too much as a society, a sports society, is because we're with these teams for so much of the regular season, right? In the NFL, 17 games, even if you play the maximum amount of playoff games, it's only 4. So what we see in the regular season is overwhelmingly how we view the player. That's why Peyton Manning is always viewed as like a top 5 quarterback, even though in the playoffs, he rarely played at sort of a level like that. Sorry, I always ding Peyton for this. Sorry about that. So to me, the fact that Jaden was able to step up the way that he did, 2 road games, whatever. You say whatever you want about Tampa and Detroit and who they didn't have or whatever, but he went into both places and they won the games. And that says a lot to me. And, does he have things to work on? Sure. Is it possible that the defense has figured some things out about how he plays? Maybe. But in the new offense and with his, clutch vibe there, I just still have a lot of faith that this is going to be fine. whether that means they make the playoffs, I can't tell you. I mean, somebody asked me earlier, where am I at on the 7.5 wins? If that's the over under, are they going over under? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, like, if assuming the injuries are reasonable, you got to tell me in one big game, who fumbles? Does their guy fumble or does the other team's guy fumble? And that switches the game. Does the kicker for one of these teams hit the upright and the ball goes out, or does it hit the upright and the ball goes in? Does the referee call pass interference when it clearly wasn't, or do they just not call it when clearly something happened? These are the things that separate you from 6 and 7 to 9 and 10, and that's such a wishy-washy answer. But that's just how most of the NFL is. Frankly, I don't even know how to argue it otherwise. I think they have a higher ceiling because the defense looks better. But where I don't. I mean, I don't even know how anybody would argue that they could be a lot better. But maybe I'm wrong. You want to be optimistic? You got all that optimism in you, or are you measured? I assume you're measured.
I am more measured. I mean, I'm optimistic that they should be better than they were last year. And on the whole, like, top 10 quarterback debate, I mean, I deliberately actively avoid those conversations because they are just rage bait conversations. But like, yeah, I think people have very quickly forgotten what Jaden did in 2024, and it far exceeds what Caleb Williams or Drake May have done in their careers so far. And that's not saying either one's a bad quarterback. I think both are very good quarterbacks and both are very talented. And like, coming out of the draft, I had them ranked Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and then Drake May, but they were all very close. So like, I ranked Caleb over Jaden, but Jaden's outperformed him. And so, yeah, I think people have forgotten how good Jaden actually is when he's healthy and has a consistent run of games. And I think what this season should have put into perspective, given how bad the rest of the team was when Jaden wasn't on the field, it's just how good Jaden was in 2024, because it was basically the same team. And I think but like, if you could go back and look at, like, if you could go back and give the MVP a year later, I think Jaden Daniels would be a significantly higher ranking member of that MVP conversation in 2024 than he was.
I brought this up the other day. I think it was I think when Jeremy Fowler had his like top 10 list, so he's polling NFL people, and Jaden wasn't in the quarterback rankings. I think he got like an honorable mention, but that's about it. I think he was technically like tied for 10th, but whatever. Anyway, and I quote tweeted and the tweet and said, "I wonder how many actual personnel people in the league would take Jared Goff over Daniels." Now, Jared Goff is a good quarterback. I'm not knocking him, but like, if you're actually going to say to them, not in this hypothetical, you can actually pick a quarterback for your team, who you're taking. I still think people would take Daniels. And I said, go back and look at 2024. If the discussion of MVP is actually for what it stands for, most valuable, not best, not who's the superstar, but who's the most valuable, how could it not be that guy? They were a horrendous team when he showed up. They still didn't have a lot of talent, as evidenced by what happened the next year when he got hurt. How is that guy not the most valuable player?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I 100% agree. Like, I think if we've learned anything about Jaden Daniels this past year, is that he was so much better in 2024 than even us living it realized at the time, because the rest of the team was so much worse. So yeah, I agree. I still think he's got superstar potential. And hopefully, talking about that optimism, like, I'm optimistically measured, and I prefer to be optimistic, because at this time of the year, if you're not optimistic, then like, what are you even doing, right? So I'm optimistic that we will see the best of Jaden Daniels, and by sort of the end of this year, we will no longer be having those conversations of, is Jaden Daniels a top 10 quarterback? Is Drake May or Caleb Williams better than him? If Jaden Daniels plays to the level that he's capable of playing of, it will be, is Jaden Daniels another MVP candidate, and a legitimate one this time? And hopefully that happens, because that will be so much more fun for me to watch and break down all over the year, rather than them losing every week and being like, oh, where's a optimistic point to look at, or this film is all terrible. So yeah, hopefully it goes that way.
All right. Well, Mark, I really appreciate the time, not just today, but always. And I was telling people, you would know this, but like, today is the actual 1-year anniversary of when I started this Substack, and you were one of the people that helped encourage me or maybe think, okay, this is something I could do. So I want to thank you immensely for that, and also all the times you've come on here and helped support the podcast. Even before I got on Substack, you were a regular. So I just want to thank you for that because it meant a lot for sure. And of course, like we're not on the it's not the exact same site, but obviously, if you're going to subscribe to me, I don't know why you wouldn't be subscribing to Mark, and hopefully, you'd feel the same way. He's the smart guy, and I'm the people who talks to smart guys. So we've got you covered from the commander's perspective in that regard, and until Substack allows us to like combine, a 2-for-1 type of deal, we can't do that. But in general, that's what we're looking at. So, Mark, I just want to thank you again for that, and I hope it's all going well for you as well.
Yeah, of course, and very much appreciate those kind words, and very much respect you as a beat reporter and everything you've done. And I think I'm glad to see that the Substack's going so well for you, and I hope it continues to do that. Because all we see from all the other media outlets right now is just layoff after layoff, and so I think the Substack kind of way is the only real way for people like you and I to go about it nowadays. And it's nice to see that there's enough people out there willing to support both of us for us to get by. So I very much appreciate those kind words, I'm appreciative of everyone that follows both of us, that supports both of us, because it means a lot to both of us, and hopefully you all get something out of what we're doing.
Yeah, I'll just say, and if you need to go,
No, I'm all good.
okay. In terms of that, look, obviously, if some bigger outlet called one of us up and said, "Hey, we'd like you to come here. We'll pay you a lot of money and give you a 401k and health insurance or whatever," obviously we would have to listen. But in terms of the nature of where things are going, ESPN's obviously in the midst right now of a bunch of layoffs. That's more of a TV thing than a writer thing, but it's all sort of connects. I think what ESPN though shows is that we are in an age of the personality more than we are of the institution. Pat McAfee and Stephen A. Smith, say whatever you want about them. They're the driving forces there, and it also applies to Dave Portnoy with Barstool, or there's like Shannon Sharp, like all the different podcasts that are out there that people find popular because of who the person is, right? Now, I'm not saying that you and I are like the most winning personalities, that people are drawn to us for our humor and our wit. But the point, though, is that we are both doing things that are a little bit different than what the norm is. You certainly are, obviously, with the X's and O's of it all. There's, not many people who are doing that in any credible way. And even from the beat reporter perspective, like I really tried to not just here's what Dan Quinn said and just that's it. I mean, I think you have to question, why is Dan Quinn saying what's in, good or bad? Sometimes it's all completely reasonable, and sometimes you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And maybe from that you can glean other things. And I think that is something. One reason why I think people have gravitated towards us is because it's what they're looking for, but more specific. I mean, who reads a game story anymore, right? Isn't that like what everybody always says? Like we all either watching the game or on social media or whatever. Like we're aware of what happened. I need now not to regurgitate. I need to explain and understand. And I think that is where this world is going, and why I think the Substack thing is more viable, because it isn't just, if it was just, I've been on various iterations of sites. I always say to myself, if I'm writing the same thing as the Washington Post, I lost that day, because everybody's going to read the Post. I have to write something that's not that. And I think that is where Substack can be a winner for people like us, if you're willing to do that. If you're just going to do the standard traditional beat job solely, well, I mean, good. Now you're really competing directly against the bigger entities. But I think that's where we are right now. Hopefully I think people recognize that, but we need more to understand that as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like it's something I've been more cautious about trying to do over the last few years is not just do the kind of standard, like, oh, here's a match report, here's 5 players I thought did well, and here's like everyone's doing that. I always try to make sure whenever I'm putting something out there, I'm trying to do like, what am I adding to the conversation? And if I'm doing a breakdown of something, then I know I'm doing something that's different from what everyone else is doing. But occasionally I'll do a post where it's like, here's what David Blau said at a press conference today. And I don't want to just put because anyone could just grab the quotes and say, here's what David Blau said. I want to try to give context. I'm like, he talked about using this kind of motion to open up this kind of thing, and then try to show examples of what that motion looks like. And here's how the Lions did it when he was with the Lions, and here's how Washington might have done it last year with their actual players. And so I try to dive into it and add something different than just what the general person's doing. And I know you try and do the same thing as well. So I think that is the path that we, as kind of individuals and not the typical beat guys, I think that's the way we have to go on about it on Substack. And I think that's why we have been able to have the success so far that we've had, and hopefully that continues, and hopefully the people watching this and reading our stuff agree with that, and more people see that and agree with that as well.
All right. And look, this is the time of year. Training camp's around the corner. Like Mark said before, if you're not optimistic now, you're never going to be optimistic.